Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at a Cub Cadet CC30 H. Customer brought it in and said that it'll turn over, but it will not start, so it won't fire up. This has got the MTD branded PowerMore engine on it. They make this with the Briggs & Stratton engine, and they make it in a lot of different setups, whether it's a hydro drive or a gear drive. We've got a bunch of different videos if you're having other issues besides it turning over and not starting. If you've got an issue with it not starting at all, not turning over, we've got an electrical full rundown on this. We've got a deck rundown, and we've got a drive rundown on the geared model. So I'll put a link to those down below if you're having a different issue. But in this video, we're going to go over the reason that this is turning over, but it will not start, the full diagnostics and repair on that. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button as we go along if you enjoy the content. Let's show you what it does when we try to fire it up. Not a whole lot, apparently, the battery. Sounds like the battery may be a little bit low, but it was turning over fine before. I did hit the switch and had it on as I was starting the intro here. But essentially does nothing when you turn it over. It'll turn over, but it will not start whatsoever. Let's dive into exactly why that is. Come back here to the engine. Normally this has a couple screws that go up through and secure into the back of this cover. These are missing. This is a little bent. We'll fix all that up before we put it all back together. But this has a 382cc MTD PowerMore engine on it. It's kind of their private label brand. Normally what I like to do is check for fuel first to see if we're getting good fuel flow and that the quality of the fuel is good, and check for spark. There's an easy way to do that without pulling the fuel line off, since the fuel line goes to the back of the carburetor here. So you essentially have to take everything apart to check that. You can check it at the fuel filter here and make sure that it is getting to the carburetor, that the flow is good and there's no water in it. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to put, you can use either starting fluid or gas or carburetor cleaner in the intake and try to start it then. If it fires up, we know the issue is that we're not getting a good fuel quality or good fuel supply. The solenoid could be bad, the carburetor could be gummed up, but it's an issue with fuel supply to the engine. Got us a little bit better of a view. Wipe all this out. You don't want any of that to get in the intake. I'm going to spray down into the carburetor just for a couple seconds, and let's turn it over. Still absolutely nothing. Still no fire out of it. What that's going to tell you is that the issue is not fuel related. If this thing would have fired up and ran for just a few seconds and then died out, that would have told us that our issue is either we've got bad fuel, the fuel quality isn't good enough, the solenoid's not working, the carb's gummed up, something to that effect. Here, next thing we're going to check is the spark, because those are your two main things that you're going to need for combustion: spark, fuel, and compression. Pull this spark plug out. It's going to be a 21 millimeter. Take it out of there, or 13/16. Brand new spark plug, that's never a good sign. So we can test this spark a couple different ways. One way is just going to be to hold it against the side while you turn it over. Normally you want to grab it with a rag before you do that. And that's just, you're going to be looking for spark in between the outside edge and the internal probe, and see if you get spark there. You should be able to see it without a doubt. We see absolutely nothing coming off that spark plug. It's a brand new spark plug. I didn't put it in there though, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch it out. Sometimes people will drop the plugs, or you never really know what kind of crazy stuff happens if you don't verify that it's a known good plug. One more time. Absolutely nothing. No spark. What that tells us here, that is either one of the safeties is killing the spark, or that we've got a bad ignition coil. If we had spark and we had fuel that we knew and we still weren't getting any fire, you can pull that valve cover off and you can check the valve train up under there. Sometimes it can be an issue where it is a carburetor issue, but it's flooded out. If you've got a bunch of fuel on the tip of the spark plug, you may want to blow that out and retry with some more starting fluid or carburetor cleaner or gas in the intake. But normally it's going to be an issue with the valve train if you know you've got fuel and you know you've got spark. Here, we're not sure if it's a safety switch or not that's killing this out. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to unplug the wiring harness. And basically the engine is separate now. If you unplug that connection, the engine is separate from the electrical of the riding mower now. So the starter is a separate power wire here. We can turn this over and the engine will turn, and there's no safety switch that's attached that can be killing the coil. If we still don't have spark at this point, the issue is going to be either one of these wires is grounded out or pinched up underneath, which is unlikely since it was working fine before. Otherwise, the ignition coil is likely going to be bad. This will not, we're not checking for it to start and stay running right now because the solenoid on the bottom of the carburetor is not going to be powered since this connection is out. We're not looking for a start and run type of situation currently. But let's check the spark again. I'm going to be brave and just kind of hold it against here. Let's see if we can. Not a thing. As long as you're back against ground, you should be getting spark out of that. Now this probably isn't a great ground, but normally if you're not using something to insulate yourself, you're going to feel that shock pretty good anyway. I'm not feeling anything. There is nothing coming off of this ignition coil. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to pull this cowling and everything off, make sure that we're not pinching any wires up underneath, but the ignition coil is likely bad. To take the seat off, there's a couple 3/8 bolts that hold it on. Hard to get any sort of socket or anything in here. I usually just use a ratcheting wrench. You could also alternatively take off the nut and the bolts on each side to take it off of the bracket. Both works exactly the same way. I find it easier just to take the 2 bolts out of the whole assembly. Seat up and off. Now that that's out of the way, we got a few of these little locks, and it just pushes up. Pull the middle piece out, and then the rest of it will just come out beyond there. Just a little plastic lock. 2 pieces to each one. I have not seen a lot of bad ignition coils on these. I think I've only seen 1 or 2. And we work on this style a lot. There's one more of those plastic locks right down here, in between where your blade engagement and your height selection is. Same thing. Take the fuel cap off just to get it out of the way. The fuel doesn't look great as I'm seeing it down in there either. You do kind of have to finagle this through as you're taking off this assembly. We'll get that piece out of the tank here. I didn't realize it has to come at an angle on this one. It's kind of a pain. Normally they just kind of pull straight out. So basically what you have to do is you've got to get, since it won't pull straight out like this, you've got to get these tabs bent in, or at least one, so you can pull that up out of there. But now this is all free except for there's some electrical over there in the throttle cable. But I normally just pull it to the side, but for now I'm going to take off the electrical connection. There's two of them. One here to the reverse safety and one to the ignition switch. I just did that to kind of get this further out of the way though, so we can see a little bit better. Now we have access to everything. We're going to take off the 10mm bolts that are holding everything on. You got one at the front. It's kind of a flange. And you've got three on top. We'll have to kind of move the throttle cable a little bit out of the way. This assembly pulls straight up and off, out of the way now. You can see the whole ignition coil assembly now, and there's one single wire that goes to it. If we unplug that, there's no way for anything to kill it out. Does this have a little tab on it maybe? Wondering if it has a little tab to keep it in place. No tab on it, and just pull that wire straight off. It's kind of bad to get that off. It was on there pretty tight. So now this is completely separate from the rest of the tractor. Not that it wasn't before. As long as you have a good spacing, almost looked like I saw a little bit of metal around there. As long as you've got a good spacing in between your magnet and your ignition coil, I say around 10 thousandths. Yeah, so it's spaced good around there, no problem. Now we're going to test that spark again. I do have to hook back up the ignition switch to do that, of course. Keep everything out of the way. Now let's see if I can't just hold it to here. You can definitely tell that battery seems low, but turning over, you should still see a spark coming out of this ignition coil. We're getting nothing. That means our coil is bad. It's going to need replaced to get our issue solved. I wanted to give a still of all of the linkages going to the auto choke, because this is one of the things I'm asked most about as far as how these hook up. That just slides through. You've got your spring that goes over to the thermal disc on the muffler. And then down here is the connection to the choke on the carburetor. We have the ignition coil in. It's a 994-00136A. You do not want to use an aftermarket ignition coil on this. You want to use the OEM coil. Never use an aftermarket ignition coil, in my opinion. Never seemed to work right. Looks just the same as the other. Take a 10mm deep well socket to pull this stud off. Guess we're gonna have to use a wrench. That is sure on there. Regular bolt at the other side. This will come off. Over here you got two clips. You just pull that down to get it out. And then you've got one plastic keeper. I wasn't worried about not breaking it because the other coil comes with a new one. I'm gonna pull that spark plug that I know is good out of there. We'll reuse it. Put this one back in. Just goes up under the tabs. And that snaps in here. What we'll do is we'll grab one of our business cards. You can also use a feeler gauge at 10 thousandths. Work well for this. You put it right in the center. You can bring your coil all the way close. Then we can tighten everything down. You basically want it as close to the magnet as it possibly can go without it actually hitting the magnet. Broke my good spray anti-seize yesterday. I forgot all about that. Now all I have is a can with all the hairs off the brush falling apart. But we want some anti-seize on these bolts. You saw how hard that one came out. So the last thing you want is a broken off bolt that's supposed to hold the ignition coil on. Push that against there. Take our card out. You can see the spacing. It's in good shape. I'd say it's just maybe even a hair closer on this side, but no big deal. No, it's not. It's good. Put our same spark plug back in. I'll test this just right up top before we even put anything back together. I'm going to insulate myself this time because it's very likely that if not, I'll get shocked. Charged up the battery overnight. Seems like it's going to hold a charge just fine. Let's see what we got here. You can see it sparking now. I'm not sure if you can catch that on camera. Sparking good. You're getting a spark each time it comes around. Let's put this thing back together, see how it runs. Put our kill wire back on. Spark plug in. And this thing's been sitting, I would assume, for the winter. So I'm really hoping we don't have to do a ton more to it. But before I finish putting the top and everything back on, I do want to fire it up and just make sure that it's going to run okay. Otherwise, you've got to take this top and everything back off. I guess you actually don't, but it'd be a little bit easier to get to the carburetor and everything there if we need to with the top out of the way. Plug our wiring harness back in. And I've got the parking brake locked down. I've got it in fast now. See exactly what happens. seem to run pretty decent. It's kind of hard to tell until we get everything put back together because the choke's actually controlled off of the fan speed. That's what pulls it back, and the temperature of the exhaust. But it sounded pretty decent so far. I liked it. I think it's going to run fine. Top straight back on. My air cleaner. Put it back in. It's not perfect, but it's not dirty either. And because of the way that that wind vane is set up, that's why they have those clips that are holding the ignition coil down. They don't want that ignition coil to get up and get in the way of the wind vane. Perfect. Start by getting my cat back out so I can have it out of the way. And you just got to grab one of these and kind of pull it towards you. Easier said than done. Get all our controls put back in. I think this one's done best down. All line back up. All of our clips go back in, and again, that's just this piece goes first, and your other piece goes down in, locks it into place. They use a lot of this style on automotive applications. Seems like they're all over the place. Different sizes and stuff, but we've got replacements because they break quite a bit when you're taking them out. They're virtually zero money, so don't get too overly excited if you break one. Next comes the seat. You can just kind of have it rest on the steering wheel up top, and everything will line up down below as long as you can keep your bolts in your hand. I'm going to wipe this down because it's going to sit under that cover. Not going to be able to power wash it real well. Should have probably wiped it down while I had it off, actually. Cover goes back on. Locks down into those tabs, and then it's supposed to sit on here again, but this thing's all bent up. Not really worried about making it perfect. I'm just going to bend it back, and then you've got a couple screws. There'll be plastic screws like this that go back into it. I've got two here that look like about the right size. I'm not 100% sure whether they are or not though. Seem like they're gonna go up in there fine. I think the originals are a little bit longer. It's perfect. I usually try to save screws like that because when you need them, you need them. Nice and solid. It looks like the deck may need a little bit of attention on this before it goes out. We'll get into that and get this thing 100% as far as maintenance and everything goes for the year. So the customer's real happy with it once they get it back. But hopefully this has helped you with diagnostics and or repair on your CC30H or any kind of Troy-Bilt, Cub Cadet, MTD, any of those models with this same MTD branded PowerMore engine on it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if I helped you out or you enjoyed the content.